Right now, there is a team battling fiercely against some extremely dangerous squirrels. The overwhelming information at hand has confused them, making it difficult to manage the situation and fight effectively. To an outsider, it might look like a game, but it's not. This is their new reality. To understand how things came to be, let's rewind a bit. Shiro, the main character, didn't realize when he was transported into this world. As he wandered around, he recognized that this was indeed the world of Akiba. Many others had also been brought here, and this was the gaming world they had once played in. The status screen still worked perfectly, but the logout function did not. He could see his friends list was active, and that many of his friends were also transported into this world. When he spotted his friend Naotsugu's name, he immediately called him, and they agreed to meet under the giant tree. This was the first time they were seeing each other's true forms. Naotsugu jokingly called Shiro Dark Glasses because of his menacing look. It had been a while since either had logged into the game, and they couldn't fathom why this was happening. Today was supposed to be the release of a new update by the developers. They couldn't remember what happened before installing the update, and by the time they realized, they were already here. The realism made it clear this was not a dream. It seemed they needed to adapt and gather information for now, as returning to the real world wasn't an option yet. Shiro noticed everything here was still like the game they used to play. So, venturing outside seemed unwise since there likely were many monsters around. The two young men then casually talked about typical guy stuff. Suddenly, Shiro tripped. He mentioned he was shorter in real life, which made moving around here a bit challenging. Shiro then unexpectedly ran into another old team member, Akatsuki, an assassin ninja. When they met, Akatsuki asked Shiro for a potion that could change her appearance because she wanted to revert to her real female appearance. Shiro had thought Akatsuki was just role-playing an assassin, so he had kept quiet, not realizing she was actually a woman. After drinking the potion Shiro handed her, Akatsuki began a transformation process and turned into a woman that matched her real-life gender. That evening, Naotsugu wondered why Akatsuki hadn't created a female character from the start. She explained that previously it was just a game, so she enjoyed the freedom of choice. But now that it had become reality, it was necessary to make adjustments to avoid inconveniences. Akatsuki felt indebted to Shiro and wanted him to state his terms for repayment. When he declined to name any, she expressed discomfort at the thought of owing someone a favor without being able to repay it. Naotsugu kept making inappropriate jokes, earning himself several knee strikes from her. Finally, Naotsugu decided to invite Akatsuki into their team as a way of returning the favor. Seeing that Shiro didn't mind, Akatsuki resolved to follow him and serve him as her way of repaying her debt. The next morning, the group went to the market to find something to eat and noticed that there seemed to be more NPCs around than before. The food looked appealing, but tasted bland, much like damp cookies. The orange juice was as tasteless as water. Suddenly, a person named Marie called for Shiro. He led his team to the area of the Crescent Alliance, where he reunited with Marie, his extremely affable sister. Upon seeing Shiro, she rushed over and hugged him profusely. His team members reacted similarly. Soon after, another person, Henry, arrived. She appeared more serious than Marie but melted at the cuteness of Akatsuki. They were there today to share some crucial information they had gathered about their situation. Firstly, the teleportation gates were almost entirely non-functional, and the issue of being stuck in the game was widespread across all servers and regions. Most guild members had already assembled, and guilds were actively recruiting new members. The game had changed significantly from what they remembered before the update. Additionally, Marie wanted to invite Shiro and his team to join her guild, but he declined and chose to leave with his two friends. Marie informed her people that Shiro had previously been the strategist for a major team, which, although active in guild-specific events, had never formed a guild itself and had since disbanded. Shiro was now curious about what would happen if they died in this world. In the game, when players died, they would respawn at the temple. But now, no one dared to test what would happen. So that evening, Shiro led his two friends to fight some monsters to try it out. They were all at the highest level, so they had some confidence. However, when they encountered a group of squirrels, They struggled with combat since they were used to issuing commands through the status screen. Akatsuki, on the other hand, adapted quickly and fought with agility, prompting Shiro to advise Naotsugu to fight with actions rather than commands. This experience gave Shiro a deeper understanding of this world. Thus, a globally renowned game had thrust its hundreds of thousands of players directly into its realm, and this event would later be known as the Great Disaster. The next morning, a player who had died fighting monsters was resurrected at the temple, suggesting that death in this world was not permanent. Shiro's group became more accustomed to the combat mechanics of this world. However, familiarity alone was not enough. They needed more practice to become proficient. That evening, Akatsuki asked to go ahead as she wanted to practice ninja-specific techniques like night vision and stealth. The forest was ideal for honing these skills. Shiro decided to use illumination spells to light the way and help Akatsuki better locate their position. The reason the whole group needed to practice their combat skills was because the major guilds in the area were expanding their territories and intimidating smaller guilds. Since fighting was prohibited in town due to guards intervening, solo or small group players were often ambushed by larger guilds looking to steal their money and equipment. Such behavior was universally despised by all players. While walking and thinking, Naotsugu told Shiro to relax as he seemed tense. Shortly after, they reunited with Akatsuki, who reported that there were no monsters ahead. However, as they approached a hospital, Shiro noticed someone moving quickly past them. Instantly, Naotsugu was hit with a leg-binding spell, which Shiro quickly dispelled. Shiro saw 4 figures ahead and realized they were some of the players who robbed others. They told Shiro to leave his possessions if he valued his life. He would drop his gear, but only if he were weaker than them, which was not the case now. Shiro then instructed Naotsugu to go ahead and tank. As an assassin rushed towards him, Shiro immediately bound him with a spell. Noticing that Shiro seemed to be their primary target, the enemy turned to him. But Naotsugu used a taunt spell to force them to attack him instead. They planned to concentrate their attacks on Naotsugu. However, Shiro cast a spell on them. While the spell didn't deal much damage, Shiro followed up with another that immobilized all of them, allowing Naotsugu to strike. Shiro's spells reduced the enemy's defenses and amplified Naotsugu's damage. Once Naotsugu broke through their bindings, their defeat was certain. They called for their healer to restore health, but Shiro had already put the healer to sleep some time ago. The assassin tried to attack Shiro but exposed a weakness that Naotsugu exploited. The leader commanded 2 mages hiding behind to cast powerful spells, but Akatsuki had already dealt with both. She had remained hidden throughout, and Shiro realized they had someone backing them since at the start Naotsugu was hit by a spell and the 4 visible foes had no mage among them. The minor spell Shiro had thrown was just to distract them from noticing their healer was out of the fight. The leader, left alone, begged for mercy but was planning to retaliate, so Akatsuki quickly finished him off. Naotsugu didn't understand why they had to engage in such senseless fighting. It seemed they had nothing else to do in this game. Honestly, Shiro also didn't know what to do anymore. The food was bland, and they had reached the level cap. Most of those who preferred peace stayed in town and scraped by. Even Shiro was unsure of his next steps. When they returned, Marie's guild reported that her people were attacked by other players and were currently being helped by a kind person. Now she needed to go to this person's location to bring her sister back. She planned to take 6 people with her and asked Shiro to stay and manage the guild in her absence. But Shiro knew it would take nearly a month to reach their destination, and he was certain Marie's group would not stand a chance against the other malicious players. He also felt reluctant to help her, knowing it would put Marie in an awkward position. Despite initial hesitations, Shiro eventually decided that his group would go to rescue the person in Marie's stead. The next day, Shiro's team officially set out. The 3 of them used whistles to call their horses. After traveling for a while, Shiro pulled out a map to check their route. Naotsugu reassured him that there was no need to feel awkward about intervening in another guild's affairs. They could consider it part of what they do in this world. Shiro and Naotsugu then used a different whistle. This one summoned griffins, a privilege only available to those who had been part of Shiro's former major team. All three then mounted the griffins, and Akatsuki experienced the thrill of flying for the first time, which she found utterly overwhelming. 3 days into their journey, the group arrived at a labyrinth. Their mission was still to retrieve a young girl for the guild, but they couldn't use the griffins indefinitely because the griffins could only be ridden for 4 hours a day, equivalent to 2 weeks of travel by horse. They had to stop at the mountain because dragons in the area would attack them if they flew on griffins. Traveling on the ground was also unsafe, hence they navigated through the underground labyrinth. The place was quite ancient and home to rat-men monsters. These creatures were low-level and knew better than to attack them due to the strength disparity, but they would fight back if cornered. Seeing the path ahead blocked by the rat-men, the group changed direction, aiming to avoid conflict as much as possible. During a rest, Akatsuki scouted the next level of the labyrinth and reported back to Shiro. Naotsugu continued to be frustrated with the bland food they had. They couldn't change the flavor of their meals, and even with a chef, the food remained tasteless. However, they still had access to spices, which retained their distinct flavors, so they used them to enhance their meals somewhat. Suddenly, Marie called, surprised at how far they had already traveled. At the same time, the girl they were looking for, Sarara, had made contact with Marie. Sarara was currently hiding in a town, working in the house of the person who had rescued her. This person was a cat beastman named Nyanta. The town was mostly populated by rogue players who bullied the NPCs, leveraging their power and influence. However, Sarara was soon to leave, as Shiro's group was expected to arrive in a few days. At this moment, Shiro still hadn't told Marie about the griffins, but Marie completely trusted him. She only wondered why someone like Shiro would refuse to join any guild. Later, Marie attended a meeting of guild leaders. Only 60 leaders participated, as the rest had declined. Back to Shiro, his group reached a bridge. Just as the bridge was about to collapse, Shiro pushed Akatsuki out of the way and fell himself. He then dreamt about when he first started playing the game. He was completely alone, playing by himself and figuring everything out. His extensive knowledge eventually made him well known, and people frequently sought his advice on how to acquire various items. Many times, he found this annoying. However, once he joined that team, he realized these were the people he needed, including Naotsugu among them. He woke up to find himself pulled out of the water by Akatsuki and Naotsugu. The three continued on their way, and Akatsuki noted that Shiro seemed knowledgeable about maps. He shared that he was a programmer who had graduated from university, making Akatsuki realize they were about the same age. Both were surprised, as Naotsugu had always thought Akatsuki was just a little girl. Seeing Akatsuki slightly angered, Shiro kept quiet. They then encountered the boss of the labyrinth. This boss hadn't been there before, so it was clearly a part of the new update. Although the boss looked intimidating, it was only mid-level, so they were able to fight it. Naotsugu started with a taunt to draw its attention, allowing Akatsuki to attack from behind. Shiro continued to use spells to bind the boss, while also casting a spell to weaken it and enhance Akatsuki's power. They successfully defeated the boss and found a way out of the labyrinth. Witnessing the sunset helped Shiro realize that this was the new experience he had been seeking. This would be their first real accomplishment since they started playing in this game. Meanwhile, a group of rogue players was seen robbing NPCs nearby. The leader quickly ordered his subordinates to find Sarara and the cat and bring them back. Not long after, Shiro's group arrived in the town where Sarara was hiding. They had already heard about the notorious guild that bullied NPCs, and they needed to enter the town to safely retrieve Sarara. If Sarara were to leave on her own, there was a high chance she would be spotted by the rogue players. If they had to risk their lives, they would make another trip to rescue her. Akatsuki stealthily went ahead, while Shiro and Naotsugu entered the town. They were quickly spotted by the gang leader and his thugs, but no immediate action was taken. Shiro reached the meeting point and was reunited with Sarara. To his surprise, Nyanta turned out to be Shiro's former team captain. Upon meeting, Nyanta understood why Shiro had arrived so quickly and was confident in the success of their plan. Sarara, knowing she was about to leave, asked Nyanta if he would come with her. He agreed, as he no longer had reasons to stay. Hearing that Naotsugu was also with them made Nyanta even more assured. They boldly walked out into the broad daylight, making sure the rogue players saw them. Although they knew this could put them in danger, as long as they were still in the town, the gang couldn't attack them. However, they still led Sarara out of the town gates, and the gang followed, preparing for confrontation. Sarara was scared, but Shiro and Nyanta remained calm. Just outside the gates, the gang leader was waiting for them. Shiro asked Nyanta if he could handle a duel with the leader, and seeing him relaxed, Shiro challenged the toughest one among them to step forward. Nyanta, noting the leader's impatience, advised him to calm down and act more mature. The leader refused the duel initially, so Shiro taunted him by suggesting he seemed less of a leader than the cloaked man next to him. Nyanta also provoked him by questioning his courage, which forced him to accept the challenge and engage Nyanta in combat. Meanwhile, Shiro protected Sarara. He noted that the gang leader was a gladiator-class character, skilled in using attacks with short cooldowns and fast execution to keep his opponents from having any time to counterattack. Although Nyanta's health was initially lower, his speed and composure never wavered. His character class allowed him to dual-wield swords and continuously inflict debuffs on his opponent. Consequently, the gang leader quickly found himself at a disadvantage and decided to play dirty by calling his allies to heal him. As they were about to gang up on Nyanta, Neatsugu appeared out of nowhere, taunting the entire group. However, Neatsugu soon found himself overwhelmed and nearly depleted of health. Shiro then instructed Sarada to cast a healing spell on both Neatsugu and Nyanta, focusing more on Nyanta. Immediately after, Nyanta took a hit that nearly finished him. Neatsugu was forced to use a skill that made him immune to all damage for 10 seconds, a skill that could only be used once every 10 minutes. The gang thought Neatsugu was out of options and had resorted to his last-ditch effort. Just as Neatsugu was running out of steam, Nyanta leaped towards Shiro and dodged an attack, allowing Shiro's binding spell to catch the gang leader. Nyanta then broke through the bindings, dealing a blow that reduced the leader's health to nearly 1. At the same time, Akatsuki had eliminated the healers and mages in the back. She was puzzled by how quickly the leader's health had depleted. She suspected Shiro had used his spell twice in quick succession. Specifically, Shiro's spell had a 15-second cooldown, aligning with the gang leader's cooldown, so he must have timed it perfectly to double cast while Neatsugu distracted the group. Indeed, such coordination could only come from a team that knew each other well. Shiro gave the gang leader a chance to retreat by leaving him with 1 health point as an opportunity for redemption. However, the leader stubbornly refused, prompting Sarara to deliver a final blow that sent him fleeing. He vowed to remember their faces and seek revenge. The trio then called their griffins and immediately departed. On their way back, Akatsuki felt somewhat downcast, doubting her ability to coordinate as well as the rest of Shiro's group. Shiro explained more about the NPCs. They were originally programmed characters, but since the Great Disaster, things had changed. NPCs now had personalities like real people. On the road, Sarara contacted Maria at home to let her know they had successfully escaped and were on their way back. Now feeling safe, Sarara burst into tears and thanked everyone. As it was getting dark, they decided to set up tents and rest there for the night. While the Shiro group was setting up the tents, Sarara and Nyanta went to gather firewood. Nyanta spotted a deer and decided to show off his skills a bit. That evening, as everyone was complaining about the bland food, Neatsugu smelled the aroma of meat. They found Nyanta grilling the meat. Expecting it to be just as bland, they were surprised when they tasted it. It was the first time they truly experienced the flavor of real food in this world. The Shiro group devoured the meal and asked for more. Sarara even thought Nyanta seemed like a mother bird feeding her chicks. Nyanta explained how he had prepared the meal. Previously, they had been obtaining ingredients and cooking food through the status screen, but he suggested discarding that approach. Now, they needed to gather ingredients and cook the food directly to bring out the flavors. However, when the Shiro group had tried this before, everything they cooked turned into a burnt mess on the stove. Nyanta speculated that they might not have reached the necessary skill level in cooking yet. Shiro realized that he had been thinking in the old ways of the game, and indeed, there was still much for him to learn. Akatsuki then stood up to formally introduce herself to Nyanta, and Sarara did the same. Sarara felt guilty for being weak and too dependent on Shiro's group. She inquired about Shiro and Nyanta's apparent familiarity, and they admitted they had been part of a casual group known as the Tea Party of the Carefree, which wasn't a major guild. They simply enjoyed hanging out, tackling challenging missions together, and acquiring high-level items. Akatsuki continued to feel insecure about not being able to coordinate with Shiro as well as his old friends did. They then noticed that Sarara seemed to admire Nyanta as an adult figure. They guessed that Sarara was probably around middle school age based on her behavior. Shiro and Naotsugu recalled that their old guild had twin siblings about that age who often followed Shiro around, asking him for game information. Both kids loved the game so much that Shiro had used a self-downgrading mechanism to temporarily play at their level. He noticed their names were still on the list and had seen them on the day of the great disaster. They decided to look for the two children, worrying that they must be very confused and scared. However, Shiro found out that they had joined a guild, so they were probably okay. Naotsugu hurriedly asked if the older sister was pretty, but Shiro had to admit he only heard her voice and hadn't seen her face. He also wasn't sure if the voice he heard was her real one. The next day, as the group set out, they got caught in the rain and had to seek shelter in a nearby village. Nyanta noted that Shiro still seemed the same as before, not belonging to any guild. Nyanta himself had once joined a guild for cat characters, which was essentially just lounging in the sun. But it disbanded after a storm blew everything away. They went to a nearby house where the village chief welcomed them and offered his barn for them to stay in. Naotsugu was happy to find the straw in the barn quite comfortable for sleeping. Nyanta and Sarara went to look for a stove to cook food. The chief's grandchildren also came by and were excited to see Akatsuki was a ninja. They learned about the village's history, which had once been devastated by a snowstorm. The children's father had gone missing, and their mother was sick and being treated in the mountains. The chief played with the grandchildren, and Naotsugu observed that NPCs now truly resembled humans. Yet, they were the actual humans, as the two players, capable of resurrection, were the most unhuman-like at this moment. They hadn't realized before how many NPCs there were. Sarada and Nyanta then brought back a lot of ingredients, so now they could actually make food. They tried making a plate of cookies, which the NPCs had never tasted before. Meanwhile, a group of adventurers was drenched in the rain on their way back. They were merely the remnants of a larger group, as most had died and been sent back to the temple. They were particularly frustrated with their leader, whose high level attracted only strong monsters, and who lacked a clear strategy for combat. Upon returning, they realized this was the guild the twins had joined. They were dissatisfied with it because the guild was practically exploiting the labor of lower-level members like them. During the next trip, the younger brother missed Shiro a lot and suddenly heard Shiro's voice nearby. But then, the young boy decided to turn back instead of approaching him. According to Shiro, a guild offers many benefits. It allows members to share a bank storage, communicate through a private system, purchase a guild hall to rest in, and more. Since returning, Nyanta had taught Marie's guild how to cook, and they had also organized a celebration feast. Henry informed Marie that they should not yet disclose the secret of cooking, as Shiro advised keeping it confidential. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Shiro helped Marie clean up, and they had a private conversation. Marie expressed her gratitude for what he had done during that time. Shiro asked if anything notable had happened in his absence. She reported that there had been fewer robberies and the public order was better. But the atmosphere seemed tenser, as if there was a growing rivalry. Her guild had just under 30 members with only a few at the maximum level, while the country's leading guild had over 500 members, mostly at the maximum level. Essentially, the larger guilds had more influence and dominated the hunting grounds. Though powerful, the guilds had agreed on a rule not to fight while hunting monsters, which reduced the number of robberies and conflict. Shiro still felt uneasy because the revenue generated had created a significant invisible barrier among players. However, they couldn't impose dual-standard ethics on those people. A few days ago, she had tried to gather several smaller guilds to discuss overcoming these barriers, but each guild had its minor opinions and no consensus was reached. Additionally, a few guilds were targeting the new level cap introduced in the recent update. However, for high-level players to gain experience, they also needed to fight high-level monsters. So, these players resorted to a cheating trick, using experience flasks. These flasks allowed users to gain certain buffs and double the experience for a limited time. But the experience flasks were distributed for free each day only to players under level 30. Thus, one guild recruited these lower-level players and collected their experience flasks to resell to larger guilds in need. Later, Shiro went out for a walk to think. He didn't know what to do in this situation. An old teammate suggested he try to solve the problem. But he felt lost as he didn't belong to any guild. Previously, he disliked joining guilds because they only targeted him for his veteran status. Suddenly, Nyanta found him still harboring negative feelings about joining any guild. Shiro knew his reasons only proved his own arrogance, but it couldn't be denied that the guild mechanism could corrupt people. Yet, isn't everything in the world prone to corruption? Denying that truth was like denying his own existence. Their former team had also been built by everyone's collective effort. Therefore, treasures should be something that everyone works together to obtain. Enlightened by the captain, Shiro realized that his friends had long been by his side, waiting for him to change his perspective on guilds. He then called Minori, the girl from the twin siblings, knowing her current situation and wanting her confirmation. She was moved to reconnect with Shiro. He promised to soon come and rescue both siblings, so she should not worry. The next day, he met up with Naotsugu and Akatsuki and decided to ask for their help. He also returned to Marie's guild to ask for their assistance in rescuing the twins. They still owed him, so they agreed to help him while also driving out the guild that was hoarding the experience flasks from new players. Shiro decided to cleanse the town, as it was operating in a very petty and dirty way. Once the largest town on the server, it had now become very weak. They wanted to know what Shiro's plan was so they could help. First, he needed 5 million gold coins, which shocked everyone. However, what he needed most was everyone's goodwill. The more people supported him, the higher his chances of success. Thus, he asked for their help once again. By now, he had established his own guild named Log Horizon, the Horizon Record. Regarding the economy in this world, a regular meal costs 5 gold coins, a night at an inn costs 10 gold coins, and 35 gold coins are needed for basic daily living. Just killing 6 goblins would nearly cover that. Therefore, the 5 million gold coins Shiro needed was a tremendous amount. Even Marie's guild only had about 60,000 gold coins in total. However, Shiro had a specific plan for that money. Meanwhile, they had their own ways to make money. Members of Marie's guild and Naotsugu were capturing wild boars. Killing them only yielded 2 kilos of meat, but capturing them alive and processing them yielded much more. Nyanta had trained more chefs for the guild. Marie had been locked away for 3 days dealing with paperwork, while Henry kept bringing more for her to process. Shiro also brought more documents for her to continue. Henry found Shiro quite ruthless with his upcoming plan. Shiro completely had Henry under control because she really liked being with Akatsuki. So just using Akatsuki as an incentive would make Henry cooperate. Akatsuki was monitoring the experience flask seller when she suddenly felt a chill. Naotsugu and the boys had just brought back the wild animals, and Marie thanked them. But it still wasn't enough, so the boys ran off to hunt more. That evening, Marie looked at the remaining paperwork and screamed. From now on, she was terrified of people with glasses, thinking they were all dangerous. Based on Henry's memories, we know she used to be an accountant in the real world. So Shiro had asked for her help in creating a new money-making mechanism. Since monster hunting here was not profitable, they would use a different approach. Once they realized there was a way, Henry confirmed that the target of 5 million gold coins was achievable. Later, Naotsugu brought cakes to Marie, who continuously complained about the workload. He thanked Marie for supporting Shiro's plan, and by tomorrow, the plan would begin. The next day, Marie and the other women opened a food stall to attract players, who expected the food to taste as bland as everything else. Despite the appetizing aroma, they had low expectations, but no one blamed them. To their surprise, they tried the food and were moved to tears, experiencing the taste of real life once again right there. The news quickly spread throughout the town, drawing more and more people to buy their food. They could barely keep up with the demand. Word of mouth continued to spread, and the number of customers kept growing. Some even started sending people to investigate. After a few days, they had collected over 40,000 gold coins. But at this rate, earning the 5 million gold coins they needed would take 4 months, which would be too slow to implement the plan. If they had enough staff, they could potentially serve up to 10,000 people a day. However, their limited workforce could only handle about 1,000 people. Money wasn't the main focus of this plan, though. After wrapping up for the day, Henry went to find Akatsuki to unwind. Akatsuki couldn't escape because she wasn't familiar with the guild area's layout and the restrictions in place. She was embarrassed to be dressed in a cute outfit and stand in front of everyone. Marie, unaware of where the blue-haired boy was, learned from Naotsugu that he hadn't returned yet. Just as they mentioned him, he arrived, dragging a giant wild boar boss to the guild. Exhausted, he soon fell asleep. Nyanto regretfully mentioned that the wild boar meat was too strong flavored to cook. Shiro then informed Minori that all the preparations were complete and asked her to hang in there a little longer. He and Nyanto went to look at houses in the town. They found that they could buy property, but the prices were sky high. Afterwards, they met with an old teammate, Sojiro, who had established his own guild to support others after the Great Disaster. Sujo thought Shiro disliked him because he had invited Shiro and his guild to join him back then, but Shiro had refused. Shiro explained his reasons and how his views had changed. Now, he needed Sojiro's help. Sojiro admitted that the town now felt like an invisible prison. Upon hearing Shiro's solution, he agreed immediately because he didn't want to waste Shiro's precious time. He knew Shiro always had clever plans that he himself couldn't fully grasp, so he didn't even need to hear the explanations. The first task for Sojiro was to help with sales, as he was also quite popular with the ladies. Shiro saw this as the moment to move the plan to Phase 2. The next day, Marie and Henry went to meet a young man named Karashin. Karashin had played with Marie before, but since they each had their own guilds, they seldom met. Karashin, who led a guild called Diamond Guild with 700 members, asked Marie what she needed help with. She needed to buy some ingredients from Karashin, mostly for the food they were selling. Knowing this, Karashin intended to hike the prices. But Shiro had advised Marie that if negotiations got tough, she should just smile and let Henry handle the rest. Sensing Marie was struggling, Henry made an offer to Karashin and told him to think it over and come back later as she had to meet with 2 more guilds soon for upcoming business plans. Karashin, curious about these business dealings, pressed for information and eventually accepted the price Marie's guild proposed for the ingredients. Meanwhile, Minori was still being exploited. She saw this world as a terrible place. On the day of the Great Disaster, she didn't know what to do besides cry and wait for someone to rescue her. However, her brother Taoya had accepted the reality. Taoya had become her support here because he seemed to enjoy experiencing new things. The daily distribution of experience flasks made Taoya want to try fighting monsters. Thanks to her brother, Minori became braver. Yet, they were quickly attacked by other players and lost everything. It was only then that they remembered Shiro's advice to keep important items in the bank. When they needed someone to lean on, they encountered a member from this exploitative guild. Minori was quite envious of Shiro because he could take on the world by himself while she only knew how to cry about her helplessness. Thus, she felt unworthy of being saved by Shiro. Meanwhile, Marie and Henry had also secured the cooperation of 2 more guilds. One person lacked finesse, and the other had a mind like Shiro's but lacked courage. Shiro made it clear that they were not to share the cooking secrets until an agreement was reached. Yet, they still held the upper hand because the recipe was a coveted prize that everyone wanted to claim. They had the right to disclose certain information and keep other aspects confidential, but they must not lie. Henry disclosed that her guild was implementing a major policy that required their help, and Shiro was leading the campaign. Everyone knew Shiro's formidable reputation, so Henry's words carried weight. The requirement was 5 million gold coins. Everyone assumed this sum was the cost necessary for a high-level mission of this expansion. Marie then let them taste a pudding made from high-level monster ingredients. This demonstrated how high-quality ingredients were necessary to produce delicious food, ensuring the profit from it would be substantial. After accounting for expenses, she needed an additional 5 million gold coins. To maintain a balance of power, she didn't want just one guild to supply everything, so she asked to meet with all three to request each guild sponsor 5 million gold coins. However, the tactless man was ready to invest all to reap the maximum profit, which forced the others to also demand to contribute. Meanwhile, the twin siblings had learned about their impending rescue by Shiro. Minori felt too pathetic to deserve Shiro's help, while Taoya, inspired by Shiro's excellence, wanted to become like him instead of relying on him. The two sisters returned home very tired. Shiro's group brought them cakes to replenish their energy and informed them that Shiro had prepared for the next step. Marie and Shiro's guild then sent invitations to major guilds across the country to attend a meeting. While Marie alone might not have drawn their attention, Shiro's involvement ensured they all postponed their tasks to attend. Shiro then called the siblings to inform them about the upcoming plan. Minori decided to change for her brother and agreed to follow Shiro. Thus, the meeting was about to officially begin. In the game, guilds are generally divided into two types. There are two types of guilds in the game, one specialized in combat, mostly composed of high-level players, and the second focused on trade and support, which typically makes up the majority. The meeting this time gathered all the guild leaders from the major guilds. Shiro stood up to start the meeting, and everyone still remembered him. He revealed that his plan to unite the smaller guilds had nearly failed because everyone was focused on their own benefits. Thus, everyone assumed this meeting would be like the previous ones. However, Shiro declared that this session aimed to improve the situation in the largest town. A combat-focused guild withdrew because they only focused on battling monsters and occasionally returned here to sell goods, so they were indifferent to the town's affairs. Shiro had anticipated the combat guilds withdrawing from the meeting. Sarara wondered where Akatsuki and Naotsugu were. Shiro had given them a different task. They were to help the children who were being exploited for their daily experience flasks to escape when they could. Akatsuki would be outside the guild hall's doors. If they risked their lives and died, Naotsugu would be at the temple to resurrect and receive them. Essentially, they just needed to run straight outside. Returning to Shiro, he informed them that only 11 guilds currently remained at the Round Table, and he wanted to invite them into the Round Table Alliance. The 4 combat-focused guilds were chosen because they were the strongest. The 3 trade guilds were also selected for their strength. The remaining guilds at the Round Table represented the players and other smaller guilds. He was merely the proposer and organizer of this conference. Since his guild only had 4 members, they did not qualify to participate as a member. Now, to the main issue. Shiro discussed how to improve public order in the town. He immediately brought up the recent exploitation of experience flasks by some guilds. While it may not violate the game's laws, the game itself had no such laws. The prohibition against fighting in town was only because the guards would retaliate, so it was merely a game mechanism and not a law. Laws are made by humans and recognized by others. Shiro cited the town where they rescued Sarara as an example of lawlessness. His words resonated with the people, but it was not enough to reach a consensus. However, they questioned Shiro about what he would do if some individuals did not acknowledge the laws he established, particularly the major combat guilds that might not comply. Shiro decided to use a deterrent. He had purchased the guild hall houses of these guilds. This meant that Shiro now controlled the checkpoints to their guilds. He had the power to blacklist anyone he chose. Anyone wanting to enter or leave the guild halls had to pass through these checkpoints. The guild's banks were also located there, making these places extremely important. Thus, Shiro had the power to prevent anyone in the town from accessing their bank accounts, earning him a reputation as a devil. The nickname Dark Glasses was not unwarranted for Shiro. At this time, the twin siblings started fighting back against their oppressors to escape from the guild. They encountered Akatsuki's group outside, and she informed Shiro that the plan was underway. Others saw Shiro's actions as intimidation, like laws set to deter. The acquisition of this place was thanks to the 5 million gold coins provided by the 3 trade guilds. They also received the cake recipe as part of the deal. From the beginning, they had no intention of opposing Shiro. Meanwhile, the twins, being further behind, were not yet out the door and were blocked by the oppressors. Their health was rapidly depleted by a spell. Minori tried to create a shield, but it did not last long. Taoya then had to drag his sister to rush out of the door. The others inside could no longer open the door because Shiro had blacklisted them. However, the guild leader managed to get out and caught Taoya. Although he couldn't use magic, he could use physical force to threaten Taoya's life. Just then, Akatsuki arrived and informed Shiro that one had been missed, so she read out his name for Shiro to add to the blacklist. Afterward, he was expelled from the guild hall and captured by Neatsugu outside. Akatsuki then took the twins to a safe place to clean up. Now that Shiro had a voice in the council, he proposed 2 changes he wanted to make to the town. When he heard that the escape was complete, he smiled to himself. The red-haired youth from a combat guild became annoyed at his smile and demanded that Shiro explain what his guild was planning. A week after the meeting, the town had almost transformed, becoming more vibrant than before. Back at the meeting, Shiro and Marie had revealed how to cook food with real flavor, which involved cooking directly by a person who is a chef. Additionally, the 3 trade guilds had collaborated to create steam engine technology that had never existed in the game before. This meant they could now innovate with their own hands instead of using outdated commands. Shiro's initiatives provided players with new motivation and goals, as most were bored with having nothing to do. Encouraging development gave people more reasons to earn money and enjoy themselves, and it wasn't just the trade guilds that benefited. The combat-oriented guilds also saw enhanced incentives to fight monsters, increasing profits for them as well. Regarding laws, Shiro wanted to enact regulations banning fighting or oppressing low-level players at hunting grounds around the town. As for human rights, he intended for players to have the freedom to join or leave any guild they wished. The prohibition against detention or oppression he proposed was to be extended to NPCs as well. NPCs, now akin to real people, were actively involved in the lives of players and were inherent residents of this world. If players continued to oppress NPCs, there would inevitably come a time when NPCs would stand up against the players like them. Thus, all 13 guilds unanimously stood up and joined the Round Table Alliance. Following that day, the guild leaders stood up to announce the meeting's outcomes and the cooking techniques. Additionally, whenever someone wanted to enter a guild hall, they would have to pay a gold coin as a form of tax. After being detained and exploited for a long time, the players held captive in the guild hall managed to escape by using teleport commands or by killing each other to respawn at the temple. They dissolved their guild and left the town. The children who were rescued joined Marie's guild, which necessitated her moving to a larger house. Meanwhile, Shiro's group moved into a new home, and Karishin came to inform Shiro that he would be hiring NPCs to work there. However, just then, another guild leader noticed that the NPCs seemed to be watching and being cautious around them, suggesting that the NPCs had started to take precautionary action. Marie and Henry then brought gifts to celebrate the housewarming. Saojiro and a former teammate from the old team, Nazuna, also came to congratulate them. The place had been renovated by the tactless brother of the leader of the major trade guild. Previously, the leader of the Black Sword Guild had also stopped by to help clean up the place. After the guests left, Shiro inquired about the twins, and Marie assured him they were fine before she left. Nyanta then went out to buy ingredients to make curry. Everyone in Shiro's group thoroughly enjoyed the curry, leaving Shiro quietly thankful that they had been with him from the start. Nyanta later returned with the twins, who both expressed a desire to join Shiro's guild. While Shiro was momentarily stunned, Nyanta reminded him that he was a leader. Shiro decided to lead the guild and agreed to let the twins join. The guild then sat under the stars to enjoy the curry, with Shiro feeling overwhelmed by the achievements he had made. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of NPCs, known in this narrative as Earthlings, The king became concerned when he heard that the adventurers, or players, had established a round-table conference. At the same time, 2 earthlings were hunting. They held a mistrust of adventurers, considering them as mindlessly violent. As they were about to shoot a deer, they noticed dark clouds gathering, signaling imminent danger. Meanwhile, the situation in the town showed significant development. Everyone had their own way of doing business and progressing. Naotsugu and Akatsuki were busy training the twins, while Shiro experimented with his abilities to develop contract drafting and similar tasks. Nyanta suggested that Shiro take a break from work for a while. Suddenly, Henry called Shiro to help handle some matters. Specifically, Marie was on strike because she wanted to go out and have fun, not just bury herself in work all day. Everyone was at a loss with Marie's stubbornness, but then Shiro came up with an idea. They organized a training trip for players under level 40. This way, they could have fun while technically still working. After discussing, they all decided to go together. Naturally, Nyanta would also join as a trainer. That night, the twins resolved to change and become stronger to prove to Shiro that he was right to invest his efforts in saving them. Though it was labeled as training, Marie and Henry were thrilled and excited about preparing the meals. Suddenly, they heard that a group was approaching the town. When they met, this group introduced themselves as envoys from the Alliance of Free Cities located to the east of the continent, which had begun to engage with the Round Table Conference. They invited the conference to a meeting of the Lords next month. Shiro knew this would have both pros and cons. The advantage was gaining more information and knowledge about the Earthlings of this world. The downside was potentially getting entangled in the political schemes of the Lords. It was a give-and-take situation. But Shiro wasn't worried about the disadvantages since the Earthlings were generally weaker than the players, meaning they would still have the upper hand. The next day, Marie's group set off for their training journey. Along the way, they enjoyed many sights they had never seen before. They decided to camp at an abandoned school and would have a barbecue that night. Unfortunately, Shiro couldn't join them because he was attending the meeting with the rest of the conference. Previously at the meeting, the Round Table had selected one member from a combat guild and another from a trade guild to attend the upcoming diplomatic event. However, they still needed someone skilled in politics and negotiation. All eyes turned towards Shiro, making it impossible for him to escape this responsibility. Alongside Shiro on the journey were the brother in black armor who wore glasses and the tactless brother from the trade guild. Akatsuki would also follow Shiro, and consequently, Henry joined as well, ostensibly to learn, but Shiro knew it was because of Akatsuki. Shiro anticipated significant changes with the Earthling. Previously, when Earthlings were just programmed characters, players could undertake quests for them and receive rewards, the most valuable being a magical bag. But now, with the game's changes, new players who didn't already have a magical bag would never obtain one. Meanwhile, after touring the town, Marie's group finally reached the anticipated destination, the beach. Everyone rushed into the sea to enjoy a swim. Meanwhile, Shiro's group had arrived at the ice castle, a place rumored to have been created by an ancient race. That evening, a dinner and meeting took place, putting everyone under considerable pressure. Akatsuki felt uncomfortable in her formal dress, which Henry kept complimenting for its beauty, mainly because it didn't allow her to conceal her weapons. The head of the alliance then met the group, with the brother in black armor boldly introducing himself as Krusty. His noble demeanor relieved some of Shiro's stress. During Krusty's discussions with the king, Shiro and Henry noticed that most nobles hesitated to approach them, as neither side had much information about the other. Both parties were eager to gather information while reluctant to reveal anything about themselves. The king then introduced his granddaughter, Lanisha, to everyone. Meanwhile, Marie's side announced that the next day they would send the group into a dungeon for a challenge, exciting everyone until they realized that only they would enter, not the trainers, which immediately changed the mood. During this time, Shiro's group watched the nobles dance. The king requested that they join in the dance since all eyes were on them, pulling them further into the social intricacies of the gathering. Previously at the dance, everyone initially refused to participate. Krusty suggested that he needed to discuss further matters with the king, which left Shiro as the designated dancer. Fortunately, Henry accompanied him as his dance partner. Knowing Shiro wasn't skilled in dancing, she guided him. Henry's character class was a sound support, so she simply set the rhythm for Shiro to follow. The pair successfully captured everyone's attention on the dance floor, and the children accidentally bumped into Akatsuki. Thinking she was a child too, they invited her to play hide and seek. She then vanished, leaving only her clothes behind. Afterward, Shiro took a break and was approached by Minori. She expressed her concerns about the upcoming dungeon trip, fearing she would be a burden since the trainers wouldn't be joining. Shiro asked if she still kept the notebook where she recorded everything he taught. He reassured her that as long as she had the notebook, she would know what to do. He wanted her to discover more on her own and not rely too heavily on direct instruction. The next morning, Shiro's group enjoyed breakfast, and Shiro promised to make it up to them for pushing the dance responsibility onto him. Akatsuki teased him for being petty, but Shiro also noticed that she seemed annoyed yet had her own retorts ready. Returning to the main issue, Shiro inquired whether the group had a chef, suspecting that the palace would need additional service support as he was sure the nobility meetings would continue. The Earthling Alliance totaled about 30,000 individuals, and with 20,000 of their players on one side, the Earthlings surely had concerns about them. The purpose of this meeting was to gauge the players' ambitions and schemes. However, the previous night's dance had dispelled some of their concerns. Shiro was certain the Earthlings were now thinking differently. Before the Great Disaster, Earthlings only needed to pay players for their services to keep them uninvolved. But since then, the number of players undertaking quests had decreased, and now they had established a governing organization that was rapidly growing, so the Earthlings felt the need to swiftly align the roundtable conference with their side. It was clear they would not accept a subordinate role, so they aimed to negotiate and bribe individual players or smaller guilds within the player faction to prevent this. To confirm Shiro's suspicions, Akatsuki was exactly who Shiro needed for reconnaissance. Meanwhile, the training group had reached the dungeon. Nyanta guided them to the beginner's dungeon, advising them to gauge their strength before attempting the intermediate level. After splitting into teams, the twin siblings went with Sarara, another girl named Isuzu, and a delusional young man named Ruddy, who was low-level but boasted often. Somehow, he had become friends with Taoya. Minori wanted to strategize but felt too shy to interrupt, increasing her self-doubt. Before entering, Nyanta and Naotsugu offered advice and encouragement. Once inside, Rudy was asked to use magic to create light to help them see in the dark cave. Sarara also managed to produce light, which made Ruddy feel competitive, but he realized more light was better and dropped the issue. They then came to a fork in the path. Since the other group had taken the intermediate path, they took the other route. Minori wanted Ruddy to keep his distance as a mage, but he thought being closer would speed up his spells. Minori resigned herself to supporting him in time if needed. The group then encountered 3 skeletons. Taoya charged forward to attack and draw their attention. However, attacking head-on caused him to take damage, forcing Minori to apply a magic buff. But buffing after the skeleton's attack like this was ineffective. Sarara had to heal, and Rudy used his magic to handle the rest. Isuzu then enhanced Rudy's magic, allowing him to shoot again, proving their coordination. Suddenly, Rudy accidentally blocked an arrow. It turned out that a skeleton had not shot it. Overconfident, Taoya rushed forward, only to be surrounded by 5 skeletons that appeared suddenly. Minori tried to cast a protective spell, but was too late. Tragically, the focus shifted to Rudy, causing his health to drop rapidly. Left with no choice, the group had to flee together. Meanwhile, Krusty was discussing matters with a royal official when he noticed Princess Lanisha and decided to pause his work to meet with her. That evening, he informed Shiro's group that he would no longer have to attend the tedious noble parties because he now had a solid shield. Shiro didn't understand what Krusty meant by a shield. Meanwhile, the princess had informed her maid about Krusty. When he approached her, she found him quite bothersome, and somehow he seemed to read all her thoughts. Krusty bluntly stated that he disliked the noble tea parties, so he chose to befriend her and used that as an excuse to avoid those gatherings. The maid cautioned the princess to not get too close to Krusty, as he was an adventurer, and they lacked any real information about such people. The next morning, The princess saw Krusty helping the soldiers with their training. She went down to see what was happening, and Krusty explained that he was just trying to learn more about the Earthling, though she knew he was actually investigating their strength. Aware of her thoughts, Krusty intentionally spoke loudly to gather the soldiers' attention. He proposed a competition where the strongest would accompany the princess. This suggestion excited everyone. As Shiro passed by, he realized what Krusty meant by a shield. While Akatsuki was gathering information on the nobility, she was discovered by some children and had to escape. At this time, Shiro was also struggling with his own conference, where everyone's ego prevented them from accepting others' ideas. Minori called him asking for more advice, but he was too busy to respond. Meanwhile, Krusty had defeated all the soldiers, and the princess was unsurprisingly unimpressed. Krusty then went out with the princess and decided to relax on a bench, suggesting she try it too. He told her that adventurers are entirely free and that attaining such freedom requires determination. Back in the dungeon, the group of youngsters kept fighting, but to no avail. They consistently lost, even though the monsters were clearly lower level. Rudy blamed the backline. Minori wanted to speak up, but couldn't find the right moment. The trainers outside continued to enjoy themselves without worry. Naotsugu isn't worried about the children getting into trouble, because if the kids are resurrected in town, Naotsugu will drive a carriage to pick them up. Afterwards, he plans to catch and boil crabs, but he only likes eating small ones since the larger crabs taste rather bland. Suddenly, Marie spots a wave in the distance which quickly disappears. Meanwhile, her tactless brother is negotiating with a nobleman. They appreciate the faux adventurer's discovery of new food processing methods, which have made their domains increasingly prosperous. However, the problem during transportation is the monsters. He thinks they need adventurers to fend off monsters, but what he really needs is maritime transport technology. At that moment, Krusty is attending a ball with the princess, speaking only to her. Suddenly, two young ladies approach and express their desire to speak with Krusty. He leads them and the princess outside. Both ladies compliment Krusty, while he modestly accepts their praises. The princess looks at him annoyingly but ends up playing along, so the two ladies leave sooner. When they depart, Krusty tells the princess he stays close to her because she resembles his sister, and being with her helps ease his weariness. She agrees to let him accompany her and extends her hand to Krusty. One might think he would kiss it, but he shakes it ordinarily instead. Meanwhile, Shiro has come to ask Akatsuki about the investigation's findings. It turns out that although the nobles are still wary of them, most are split half dislike them, while the other half wish to align with them. Suddenly, a wizard named Regan approaches and introduces himself, leading them to his personal library to entertain his guests. Regan discusses a magical bag and how to obtain it. Meanwhile, the young adventurers are planning to sneak into the dungeon again, but Naotsugu forbids it as they need to learn to respect the rules. During this time, Regan shares with Shiro his research on using world-class magic. There are various levels of magic, with world-class magic being the most powerful. It has the potential to change an entire civilization. In the past, the world was home to many different races. However, the militarily strong races were weak in terms of reproduction, and were eventually subdued by the dominant race, the humans. They summoned 6 vengeful goddesses in their fury. This was the first time world magic was used. Although the goddesses were soon suppressed by humans, they had succeeded in wreaking havoc on humanity. This led to the breeding of goblins and monsters that have a respawn mechanism, making them endless in number. World magic was then activated again, bringing adventurers to this world over 200 years ago. Shiro, known in recent times for about 100 years, realized that time in the game passes 12 times faster than in real life. Thus, nearly 100 years corresponds to about 8 years since he started playing the game. The event that summoned adventurers to this world happened 20 years ago, when the game officially launched. Shiro then wanted to investigate further because, according to Regan, both humans and players here possess a form of energy known as the soul, which directly influences their memories. Therefore, each time a player dies and is resurrected, they forget a certain amount of their memories. Meanwhile, the young group decided to venture into the dungeon once more. But suddenly, Minori realizes something. Taoya also seems to have a suspicion. Minori, still scared, slaps herself to stay alert and stands up to speak. She suggests that they wait until the evening to see what happens. Minori's reason is that she wants the group to spend the day getting to know each other. Despite being together for 3 days, she knows very little about them. Rudy starts off by demonstrating his most powerful and effective skill, creating a massive magma ball that inflicts severe damage. Taoya then shares that he has a skill that provokes enemies, but its range is quite limited, so he wants Ruddy to wait for him to gather as many enemies as possible before striking. Isuzu also tells them about a new skill she has learned that reduces damage. Rudy then admits that he had been too naive. The entire day was spent with the group sharing detailed information about each other. The next day, they re-entered the dungeon and coordinated their actions as planned. Taoya will charge ahead to attract the enemies. Once the enemies are focused on him, Isuzu and Ruddy will step in to attack. Sarara will stay in a safe corner to monitor the timing for health buffs. Minori will keep an eye on the surroundings to alert the group. Once sure there are no additional enemies, Taoya uses his provocation skill to draw all the enemies' attention, allowing Ruddy to unleash his attack. Isuzu casts a skill to reduce the damage taken by Taoya, making it easier for him. With just 2 spells, Magma and Ice, Rudy manages to defeat all the monsters. The group officially celebrates their victory upon seeing no more enemies. Everyone is elated by their success. Meanwhile, Minori has come to understand the advice Shiro gave. Simple conversations can be incredibly effective. At the same time, Henry notices that Shiro has been tirelessly working and looks very tired. She wants him to take some time to rest. But Shiro is currently pondering over the things he heard from Regan. Indeed, they still don't fully understand this world, and he wonders if dying too often could make them forget the real world altogether. Suddenly, Minori calls. Hearing her voice, Shiro realizes that the youngsters have come to understand each other better and have overcome their issues. After hearing her recount the dynamics within the team, Shiro laughs because, while the experiences may seem ordinary to others, the children have gone through a lot to achieve such harmony. Shiro now decides to move forward with a cheerful mindset, similar to Minori's. Later, Isuzu shares with her siblings that she feels a certain thrill around Ruddy. That evening, Isuzu sits down to talk with Ruddy and realizes that her affection is because he reminds her of a puppy, rather than a typical romantic interest. She wants to add Ruddy to her friends list for future encounters, but suddenly can't. The next morning, Xiaoyu, a young leader under Marie's command, rushes to the beach upon hearing of a monster attack. The monsters attacking Marie's people on the beach are low level, but arrive in large numbers. Xiaoyu helps so Marie can temporarily retreat to prepare. Xiaoyu and his group gradually get surrounded by a large number of fish monsters. Meanwhile, Neatsugu is unable to provide support as he is currently engaged in battle with 7 goblins. Nyanta, while patrolling the skies, discovers that many more creatures are approaching. At the ice castle, Shiro receives news from a messenger about the goblin hordes. Nyanta reports that thousands of goblins are advancing, and contact with Marie's group has been lost. However, the young adventurers have returned and regrouped with Neatsugu and Nyanta. Both parties have managed to establish communication with Marie and Shiro to relay the news. Shiro then calls a remote meeting of the round table to discuss the situation with representatives. He reports that across the continent, many areas are under attack by monsters, specifically goblins. On the coast, there are hundreds, and in the forests, goblin tribes are looting with up to 10,000 members. It seems this situation has arisen due to the return of the Goblin King. Every 2 years, a new Goblin King ascends, which was previously seen as an event where players would defeat the new king before his official coronation. This was once a common event. However, since the disaster, players have almost ignored it. So this return of the Goblin King could be considered a much stronger event than before. And with the coronation of the Goblin King, it raises the question of how powerful the United 6 Goblin tribes will be. Previously, there were knights to assist in these battles, but now their whereabouts are unknown. Marie and Neatsugu's group have also reconvened. Marie is relieved to see everyone is safe and then changes into her combat attire. Nyanta discovers a group of goblins near the mountainside. After consulting a map, he realizes the goblins are targeting a town near the beach, which lacks fortifications and could be obliterated overnight. However, this goblin group is only a mid-sized raiding party, so there is still a chance to intercept them. Minori's group also wants to help. Isuzu feels they are still too weak, but they can't just abandon the villagers because of their weakness. Minori asks Naotsugu's group for permission to assist. Meanwhile, Sojiro has brought reinforcements for Shiro. Shiro has informed everyone about the price of dying in this world, losing a part of their memories. However, how much and which memories might be lost, he does not know. Krusty informed them that he had died several times before, and it seemed that the memories lost were about the old world. The loss of memories wasn't too concerning, but to avoid it, one simply shouldn't die. However, one should not avoid taking risks out of fear of death. Minori's group was not approved by Marie to go along, but they still wanted to move forward and managed to get permission to patrol. Although they said they were patrolling, they were ready to rush in to save people if possible. However, they were late because a village near the town had already been destroyed by the goblins. Taoya, seeing a goblin destroying a doll belonging to a little girl they had met on the road, became enraged and charged into battle. They decided to rush in to save people without needing any other reason. They couldn't just run back and abandon the town. Minori had a plan. Instead of focusing on saving that particular town, they would take a different approach. Naotsugu's group found them and believed that Minori had the freedom to do whatever she liked. They wouldn't stop her but would listen to her plan. Minori suggested that they should ambush the goblins before they reached the town. Naotsugu then reported back to Marie. Marie disapproved of letting the youngsters fight the monsters, but Naotsugu believed that if they struck first, the goblins wouldn't be able to attack the town, and they wouldn't be under pressure to protect the civilians. Also, the surprise attack would likely prevent the goblins from retaliating effectively. He also promised to take good care of the youngsters, so there was no need to worry. Upon hearing the report about the plan, Shiro knew that his side would also have to act, not just sit idle. The council at that time was still unable to reach a consensus. Some suspected that this was a plot by the adventurers. However, anyone with an opinion was encouraged to speak up since there were no adventurers in the meeting room. Their only hope was the Knights' Brigade, but for some reason, the Knights had disappeared without a trace. The military fort was left empty without any signs of battle. The council was considering sacrificing a fortress to draw all the goblins to one place and then launch a surprise attack. However, the lord whose domain was targeted by the goblin horde stood up in protest, as he did not want to sacrifice his territory. At that time, Minori's group encountered a few goblins. As they charged, Sarara bound them, allowing Ruddy to enhance Taoya, who dealt with them. When two more charged, Rudy used magic, boosted by Isuzu, to handle them. The group continued to coordinate effectively. Meanwhile, Shiro had devised a strategy. He knew the nobility would surely seek their help, but they shouldn't assist too readily, so he planned several roles for them to play accordingly. The princess, hearing some counselors discuss asking the adventurers for help, realized this meant owing the adventurers a debt, and they needed to avoid exposing any vulnerabilities. They also didn't want to reveal that the Knights' Brigade had disappeared. Later, the princess went to see Krusty. He thought she should be sleeping by this time, but despite being seen as lazy, she still had concerns to address. The young group was preparing for the next wave. Rudy was delighted with a new gauntlet they had acquired during their recent dungeon raid. It only increased a mage's strength, so the group gave it to Ruddy. He cherished it greatly as it was a collective achievement. Meanwhile, 3 representatives from the round table were invited to meet with the lords. Knowing that the other side was waiting for them to speak first, Shiro stood up and directly asked about the whereabouts of the Knights' Brigade. The lords, wanting to keep it secret, were evasive and expressed a desire for the adventurers there to resolve the issue. The lord whose domain was under attack claimed that the adventurers' power was a gift from the gods, and thus they had a responsibility to protect the continent. Michitaka, a merchant brother, slammed his fist down on the table, angry at the suggestion that they had an obligation to help this alliance when they weren't even its members. Other lords did not intend to force them into action, but they suggested that it would be unconscionable for the adventurers to simply watch the continent face danger and do nothing. However, Michitaka argued that they were not beasts to be commanded by the lords. True, they might be immortal, but adventuring still came with the risk of losing memories. Michitaka's rather extreme reaction left Krusty unsure of what to do next. However, the princess stepped in and sought Krusty out to ask for help reaching their town. She wanted to rally a volunteer army, and in exchange, she would reveal the disappearance of the Knights Brigade. The lords were displeased with her actions, but the king allowed her to continue. She acknowledged that the Earthlings were much weaker than the adventurers, but they had no right to exploit their own vulnerability to coerce the adventurers into acting as mere tools. Knowing that adventurers are free spirits, she decided to appeal to those who wished to help her voluntarily. Exhausted by her plea, the princess was supported by Krusty. Shiro decided to delegate command to Krusty, letting him make the decision. Krusty then took the princess back to the town. Shiro recognized that the princess had achieved something unique, potentially changing the situation in the area thanks to this timid princess. Overwhelmed by the bustle of the place, the princess was momentarily left in Shiro and Akatsuki's care while Krusty attended to some matters. Unsure of where to begin, Shiro guided her. Back at the castle, Michitaka felt disillusioned and unsure of what to do next. He saw Sujiro arrive, immediately surrounded by women, which caused Sujiro's subordinates to feel jealous, though they restrained themselves due to the professional setting. Shiro then took the princess around the town and eventually to meet Karashin. He needed Karashin to find a beautiful Valkyrie outfit for the princess. The children ran up to invite the princess to eat burgers, delighted by how she matched their imaginative idea of a princess. Afterward, Shiro returned with the outfit and asked Akatsuki to help the princess change. Once ready, Shiro brought the princess to meet everyone. He gathered them together and announced that the princess's alliance was under attack. They could easily handle the goblins, but the problem was that they would not receive any rewards for this. Therefore, if anyone disliked participating, they could simply stay home and ignore the alliance's plight. However, he still wanted the princess to try and persuade them herself. Dressed in the Valkyrie outfit, the princess looked stunningly beautiful. The princess introduced herself and confessed that her country was in dire straits. The Knights Brigade had disappeared. She apologized because her council had intended to coerce them into fighting due to their immortality. She admitted that the prosperity here made it unclear how to properly compensate them. She acknowledged her own laziness and timidity, describing herself as no more than a decorative vase. However, as a princess, she still felt a duty to stand up and protect her homeland. Everyone was touched by her sincerity and rallied together to help her. They had been waiting for a significant event like this to engage in, so Krusty decided to take command of the operation. With Shiro acting as the chief strategist, they planned to prepare in the next 15 minutes. The next morning, Shiro wanted them to quickly disperse the goblin horde since no one knew where the goblins would target after disrupting the alliance. The steamship that the merchant guild was close to completing had to be deployed immediately. Krusty would lead the initial group by ship, while Shiro would bring reinforcements to a strategic area. He informed Michitaka to ensure he would monitor the actions of the lords from the other side. Henry then reported that the king wanted to meet Michitaka. Initially, the king shared that the lords were divided due to the princess's actions, partly because they suspected he was secretly colluding with the adventurers. But his greatest concern now was the security of his own territory. The king apologized for the lords' clumsy behavior and their schemes that had once intended to impose on the adventurers. He now recognized that the adventurers' power was comparable to his alliance, so he wanted to establish a peace treaty with them. However, Henry and Michitaka did not want to make this decision themselves and left it for Shiro to handle upon his return. Meanwhile, the princess was on the ship, worrying about the chaos she had caused and how it had embarrassed the king. Considering it a flight from her responsibilities, Krusty knew she wanted to make amends. Even though she was ashamed of her actions, she did not regret them. Since she had asked for their power, she felt obligated to join them in battle. There were many new experiences for her since leaving the alliance. Therefore, she felt like a bird in a cage. She lacked political influence and held no military value. She recognized that her worth was almost negligible, yet she still wanted to protect the freedom of the adventurers. Krusty was about to say something when his subordinates called him away to prepare, so he promised to meet with the princess later. Meanwhile, Marie's group had regrouped with Neatsugu's team. They had successfully defended the town, and Marie was still surprised at how much the Earthlings resembled humans. It was Shiro who had pointed this out and reminded them of it. Now, Krusty stood up to brief everyone on the plan. His subordinates informed the princess that Krusty was one of the top 20 tacticians among the adventurers. They would also arrange for her protection, so she was advised not to do anything foolish. Marie's group was discussing the area where Krusty would engage the Goblin. The success or failure of Krusty's actions would impact the security of the region. Suddenly, Minori approached Sarada to ask for a favor. That evening, Krusty began to confront the large band of goblins. The mages unleashed a preliminary spell attack to reduce their numbers before allowing Krusty to lead the charge. Each goblin could be taken down with just one strike. Krusty's tactics also managed to eliminate a large number of enemies. Two high-level monsters approached. Krusty swiftly dodged their attacks and retaliated with a single powerful blow. The princess observed that Krusty fought with an air of excitement, yet there seemed to be a hint of solitude about him. Back at the logistic team, Shiro was monitoring the situation and directing the divisions. This logistic division of Shiro's was enabling smaller units to communicate through a form of telepathy, making it easier for them to coordinate and understand each other during battle. As the situation was progressing well, Shiro also wanted to keep an eye on Marie's side. If Krusty's forces managed to drive the goblins away, the creatures would likely disperse and attack smaller villages. Therefore, they needed to funnel the goblins into a specific area. Marie's forces were currently stationed near a coastal town and needed to be vigilant lest sea monsters breach their defenses and break the blockade they had set up to contain the goblins. Shiro couldn't go to the battlefield until he had full control of the situation. Meanwhile, at Marie's location, the twins on patrol discovered an approaching wave. Marie's group quickly responded and found a horde of monsters following it. Marie didn't want the young ones to go into battle, but everyone pleaded with her to let them fight. Neatsugu also persuaded her to change her mind. News of the situation at Marie's side had already been sent to Shiro. The trainers at that moment couldn't join the battle and had to wait to fully recover their energy. Nyanta watched the young group fight and noted everyone's progress. Tauya had become stronger. Sarara was no longer confined to healing roles and could summon support for additional attacks. Isuzu and Ruddy coordinated exceptionally well, using techniques that, while low on resources, were highly effective. Rudy was truly a mobile torch. Minori, from the rear, observed and distributed tactics to the entire team. She was fighting like a second Shiro. Shiro, who could anticipate the battlefield 30 seconds ahead with only a 1% margin of error, was someone Minori was chasing after, and they wondered how many seconds ahead she could now predict. Suddenly, an alarm they had set in the rear sounded, indicating the goblins were returning, so the whole group moved there and left the trainers to handle the rest. Neatsugu knew they were taking risks, but Minori wanted him to trust this young group. The group then saw a large number of goblins, but they only needed to gather them together. Rudy fired a laser to draw their attention. Isuzu used a slow spell, and the group continued to launch all their attacks at them. After completing the task, Minori mentioned that she could now predict 5 seconds ahead with a 5% error rate. She wasn't yet on Shiro's level, but was determined to keep improving. Another alarm went off elsewhere, so the group had to keep moving. Shiro told Marie to hold on for another hour as reinforcements were on their way. Minori's group was nearly out of energy, and they didn't know how long they could hold on. Upon hearing that help was near, they maintained their resolve, believing they just needed to endure a little longer. Suddenly, it started raining, and the goblins and wolves approached again. While the goblins could be managed, the wolves were a different story. They were faster and more dangerous, which forced Minori to use her ultimate move, which had a 1-day cooldown, to protect her younger brother. Faced with 2 wolves and a high-level goblin targeting Tauya, their chances of winning were slim. Minori instructed Tauya to stall the high-level goblin and 1 wolf, While the duo Ruddy and Isuzu quickly dealt with the rest, Shiro had taught her that when facing numerous and formidable enemies, it's strategic to prioritize eliminating the weaker ones first to reduce the potential damage they could inflict. However, before they could act, Tauya was targeted. Sarara tried to heal to buy time, but Minori needed another 8 seconds to cool down her shield spell. Still, it was uncertain whether just the shield would be enough to withstand such massive damage. So, Rudy decided to grab the wolf and drag it away. After luring the wolves far enough, Rudy shoved his hand into a wolf's mouth and detonated his gauntlet. The group then rushed over to see and tried to resurrect Ruddy. But Ruddy wouldn't wake up. Isuzu had to reveal the truth that Ruddy was an Earthling. She had learned this when she first befriended Isuzu, who had discovered and promised to keep Ruddy's secret, as he had always tried to conceal that he was not an adventurer. Sarara suddenly thought to try a healing spell, and somehow Ruddy showed a weak response, providing them with a glimmer of hope. But Minori called Shiro for help immediately. She had never really asked him for anything substantial before. Usually, she just sought his advice, but now she urgently requested his help to save her Earthling friend. Shiro had to ask Karashin to take over his duties temporarily so he could attend to this matter. He then called a carriage and started contacting Minori's side to get updates. After learning the situation and their location, he instructed Minori to keep him posted. He told Tauya to stay alert for any more monsters, while Sarara and Isuzu should alternate using resurrection and healing spells every 2 minutes. This strategy was set by him to preserve Ruddy's soul from disintegrating after death. If the soul were to disperse, there would be no way to save it. According to Regan, there was still a way to save an Earthling if acted upon immediately after death and before the body began to decompose. Shiro remembered Regan's words about world-class magic and asked Akatsuki to hold the reins for a while. Meanwhile, the princess was taken to meet Krusty, who was bathing. He inquired about her impressions of the battlefield and noted that she seemed to have gained quite a few admirers. News arrived of a new wave of monsters, rekindling Krusty's enthusiasm for battle. Shiro had finalized his plan and heard that the steamship was about to reach the beach to support Marie's group. He then landed and sent Akatsuki on the carriage to blockade the area. Shiro assessed the situation and warned the youngsters not to tell anyone about what he was about to do, threatening to abandon Ruddy if they did. He then used magic to draw energy from the group to transfer to Ruddy, because saving someone required restoring both health and energy. With energy secured, all that was left was to use a healing spell. To link the energy and blood, Shiro used an additional item that allowed Ruddy to revive for just 3 minutes. Ruddy regained consciousness and wrote that he had died. He wanted everyone not to blame themselves, as sacrificing in battle was common. However, Shiro countered this, saying giving up too easily did not befit an adventurer. But he had a way to change that. He produced a contract for Ruddy to officially become an adventurer. This was like a covenant for Ruddy to formally join his guild, subject to all its terms and duties. In return, Ruddy would officially become a free individual. Ruddy accepted the contract, but when he couldn't hold the pen, Isuzu helped him sign. Once signed, Ruddy's 3 minutes were up, and he could be resurrected at the temple as he was now an adventurer. This was the world-altering magic that Shiro had devised, transforming an Earthling into an adventurer. Meanwhile, Krusty's group encountered a pack of goblins riding wolves. Among them was the Goblin King they needed to eliminate. Krusty's group methodically took out each one, even summoning a phoenix to aid in the effort. Eventually, Krusty personally dealt with the Goblin King. The remaining goblins were left for Shiro's team to handle. Marie and Naotsugu could finally rest after a prolonged period of intense combat. Both had performed admirably. Shiro, on the other hand, had come to a realization. Previously, he viewed adventurers as mere players like himself. But now, he saw them as teammates, ready to embark with him on new adventures. The next morning, Ruddy woke up in the temple and was reunited with Isuzu. She scolded Ruddy for his reckless behavior and not listening to her. Ruddy promised to heed her words from now on to avoid further scolding. A month later, both the Round Table Conference and the Free Cities Alliance held a celebratory feast. During the feast, Krusty was seen chatting with others, occasionally glancing at the princess, suggesting a mutual affection. Xiaoyu, however, was puzzled as to why the goblins and the Goblin King hadn't been completely dealt with, revealing that the true Goblin King was still alive and hiding in a cave. Nyanta suggested that they didn't need to pursue further as both factions had signed a trade agreement, and the Earthlings had assigned adventurers the task of goblin extermination. As long as the Goblin King lived, the goblins would continue to provide a source of profit for the adventurers. This had been part of Shiro's plan all along. Isuzu also asked for permission to join Shiro's guild. Henry went looking for Shiro at the feast, but couldn't find him because, as the chief strategist, he should have been present. She then went off to find Shiro. Meanwhile, Shiro, who had been working with Akatsuki, heard Henry coming and decided to slip away. He had just left when he heard news of a festival of spirits and decided to head there first. The adventurers were now boasting about their exploits. Nyanta and Naotsugu were aware that death meant losing memories, but had not disclosed this to everyone, choosing to share it only with key members of the round table. As Shiro passed by a woman recounting a tale to some children, he overheard her story. She spoke of warriors braver than the Knights Brigade, possessing immortality, who helped the Earthlings fight and vanquish numerous formidable monsters. Shiro thought she was just telling a story about adventurers, so he continued on his way. Suddenly, the story took a turn. One of the adventurers died because they were actually an Earthling. The mages could not resurrect them, so they sought help from a great wizard. This wizard used a world-class spell to resurrect the Earthling as a hero like themselves. Realizing that the story was about how he saved Ruddy, Shiro stopped to listen. The woman then left, and Shiro felt compelled to find Rigan to discuss it. Rigan knew that Shiro had used world-class magic a month ago, and Shiro acknowledged that it was thanks to Rigan's knowledge that he was aware of such magic. Rigan informed him that just a few days earlier, he had sensed someone else using world-class magic in the West. Shiro realized the only place in the West he hadn't checked recently was the Minami region, which was currently hosting the Festival of Spirits he had heard about. It was ruled by a guild, and Shiro noted that the Festival of Spirits, much like the Goblin King event, was a cyclically occurring event, likely involving the Knights Brigade. As Shiro left to continue his investigation, Henry spotted him and dragged him away. Meanwhile, at the party, the music had started, but no one dared to initiate the dance, so Krusty approached the princess for a dance. As they danced, the princess recalled her uncle telling her that the idea to request help from the adventurers was hers, so she would be responsible for rewarding them. Her uncle proposed establishing an embassy in the adventurers' town, and she would be the ambassador responsible for maintaining the friendship between the two factions. Krusty, understanding her thoughts, reassured her that once there, she could indulge in her lazy dreams without worrying about formalities. She liked the idea but remained cautious, as Krusty was a cunning devil who seemed to read her thoughts. At that moment, Sarara also wished to be by Nyanta's side, but she regretted not being able to join Shiro's guild while still a member of Marie's team. Nyanta then invited her to dance. As Minori was searching for Shiro, she overheard some people speaking ill of him. They claimed Shiro had forced the princess to the battlefield among other fabrications. Shiro, not fond of the party atmosphere, had slipped away with Akatsuki. Seeing Akatsuki deep in thought, she confessed feeling unhelpful on the battlefield. Shiro reassured her that her continuous support had been invaluable to him. Noticing her hesitation, he suggested they dance since he had seen her practicing recently. Both were novices in dancing, so there was no fear of embarrassment. A few days later, the princess arrived in the adventurer's town. As for the matter of death causing memory loss, Shiro only released it as a rumor. Some believed it, others didn't, so it didn't cause any chaos. With autumn approaching, Marie started planning a festival, confident in her preparations. Soon after, the festival was approved, and everyone began working on it. Many even created models of the princess for sale. Marie prepared a multitude of decorations, and her team planned to also sell winter clothing. Minori intended to invite Shiro to the upcoming festival. Meanwhile, Shiro, busy with work, was visited by Henry. She came to see how he was managing because she heard he hadn't left his house in days. She advised him to take time to enjoy the festival with friends and reminded him that as a member of the round table, It was also part of his duties. He promised to arrange his work, so Henry left. Akatsuki then appeared, bringing red bean paste buns for Shiro, urging him to take a break. They went outside to eat, and Shiro realized it had been a long time since he had a moment to relax. Akatsuki wanted to ask him to the festival, but before she could, Minori arrived and invited him first. Akatsuki and Minori then competed to accompany Shiro, leaving him to ponder a solution, when suddenly, he had an idea. Minori was preparing her attire when Isusu approached her. Minori wanted to enter a cake-eating contest with Shiro. If they won, they would get an invitation to the royal banquet. Minori wished for more people to understand Shiro, as many still perceived him as cunning, while in reality, he was kind-hearted. Isusu decided to help Minori. Meanwhile, Akatsuki, realizing she was competing with a high schooler, felt annoyed that Shiro still treated her like a child. However, Shiro had promised to go with both her and Minori, which made her consider it a date. Confused about what to wear, she rummaged through her room but couldn't find anything suitable, so she decided to seek someone else's help. Henry sensed that Akatsuki needed her and rushed off, but Akatsuki, feeling a chill, decided to find something on her own. She then went to seek help from Karashin and Michitaka to find an appropriate outfit. On the day of the outing, Akatsuki showed up in a harmonious outfit. Shiro complimented both for looking very elegant. When the bakery presented the cakes, all three thought they could easily eat 4 cakes to win the contest. However, when the cakes arrived, they realized they had to consume 4 large cakes, which made them start to worry. While the cakes tasted good, Shiro found it difficult to swallow as the group behind them jeered at him for bringing 2 dates. Both competed to feed Shiro bites. Each bite added to Shiro's pressure, feeling less stressful than facing 12 bosses at once. Eventually, Shiro had to leave with a stomach full of cake. Shiro had planned to continue enjoying the festival, but after eating so much, he lost his enthusiasm. Minori told the two to go ahead while she bought some tea to help Shiro digest the massive amount of cake. Even though they didn't make it to the banquet, they still had fun. That night, Shiro thought about the mountain of cakes and felt a stomach ache. He called Sojiro to tell him about the eating contest, curious to see how many cakes Sojiro could eat. Shiro was envious of Sojiro, who always had girls around him yet managed his guild duties well. He thought Nyanta and Naotsugu might even do a better job leading the guild than he did. Suddenly, Akatsuki showed up, thinking Shiro would hate cakes after today's ordeal. Typically reserved, both Akatsuki and Shiro now found themselves at a loss for conversation topics. Akatsuki, finding the situation somewhat amusing, reached out and touched Shiro's forehead. Just as Minori was about to bring over some tea, she witnessed this interaction and abruptly left the tray behind. Rushing off, she ran to a corner, heart aching upon realizing that Akatsuki also had feelings for Shiro. She broke down, exclaiming that Shiro should be hers. At that moment, Tauya found her, and the siblings had a heartfelt talk. Minori confessed her crush on Shiro, which Tauya had long suspected. Everyone who knew Shiro liked him. He was caring like a mentor, admired by all his juniors. Tauya, of course, understood his sister's feelings, but nothing significant had happened between Shiro and Minori yet, so he suggested letting things continue as they were. The next day, Shiro's group sat down to decide what to do since it was only the second day of the festival. The Minori siblings decided to spend the day together. Isusu planned to take the little golden-haired pup for a walk. Shiro thought he would bury himself in paperwork again, while Naotsugu intended to work as a food safety inspector. While eating, Naotsugu saw 2 young men quarreling and stepped in to mediate. Akatsuki noticed Naotsugu was mostly eating and teased him, which led to a playful argument between them, ending with Akatsuki threatening to skewer Naotsugu. He then gave her a gift voucher to keep her occupied, which involved collecting stamps at various food stalls to win a prize. Naotsugu's teasing eventually got him a beating from Akatsuki. Afterwards, Akatsuki stopped by a souvenir stand to browse. Meanwhile, Minori went to Marie to ask for tickets to the banquet. Marie directed her to Karashin for the tickets. Minori was puzzled to find Marie hiding in a barrel, who joked she was nourishing her skin, though she was actually avoiding work to escape Henry's notice. Akatsuki, who had bought a new hairpin, went to show it off to Shiro, but he didn't notice and told her to see Henry for some task, asking to be left alone to work. Frustrated, Akatsuki threw the gift she had won at the stalls at Shiro. Naotsugu then realized his own voucher had been switched, giving him another excuse to eat more. Minori found Karashin busy when she arrived, so she offered to help him. Isusu noticed Minori trying to help Shiro restore his reputation. As previously, Shiro had always directed all the credit towards Krusty, leaving himself none. Observing a dispute between an earthling and an adventurer, Rudy stepped in to mediate. Meanwhile, Henry found Marie, who was tired and wanted to bathe, so she called Naotsugu to help with carrying tasks. Knowing Marie's interest in Naotsugu, she specifically requested his assistance. Marie quickly finished her bath to avoid embarrassment in front of Naotsugu. Henry, meanwhile, realized she was developing feelings for Shiro, considering him the best person she had ever met. Akatsuki also showed up, and Henry informed her that she needed Akatsuki's help to sell winter goods later that day. At the same time, the princess was organizing the venue for the banquet. She felt deceived by Krusty because her stay had not been leisurely at all. Krusty arrived to find her busy arranging the banquet, her intention being to do something to thank the adventurers. They ended up sitting down together for tea. Elsewhere, Minori was showing Karashin her new profession. She had previously sought Shiro's advice and decided to switch from tailoring to an apprenticeship. This new role would allow her to copy the skills of others at a lower level. She believed this would help her interact with more people and improve Shiro's reputation. She performed so well that even Karashin was impressed. Nyanta and Sarara were out eating when a troublemaker nearly started a brawl in the restaurant, prompting Nyanta to intervene. He threw the man out, earning Sarara's admiration. Nyanta informed Shiro that the arrival of Earthlings had caused significant disruption for the adventurers. While Earthlings were professionally engaged in trade and structured in a hierarchical society, adventurers were freer but somewhat amateurish in their dealings. The Black Sword Guild and Krusty, responsible for security, often had to resolve conflicts, mostly between players and Earthlings. Meanwhile, Shiro visited the fair to check on Marie's group's stall. Akatsuki, trying on clothes for Henry, ran into Shiro again. Noticing a disturbance nearby, he went to investigate. An Earthling wanted to buy all the merchandise from a stall, but the stall had refused. Shiro intervened to prevent a man from causing trouble. The stall was set up more as an activity rather than for business, so they were not selling everything in one go. Suddenly, Shiro noticed an unusual level of noise around him, mostly emanating from the Earthling. Minori also called to report that there were many basic errors in the paperwork, predominantly caused by the Earthling. Realizing the potential for chaos, Shiro immediately instructed Akatsuki to retrieve the reports and bring them to him while he returned to the guild hall to review the situation. Shiro deduced that the town was about to be attacked. He acknowledged his carelessness in allowing the enemy to gain an advantage. In the office, he noticed that in just 2 days, numerous conflicts had arisen. It appeared that the enemy's goal was to infiltrate and provoke disputes to undermine the reputation of the Round Table. The princess heard that a Western Count had arrived, and she would need to host him. The red-haired member of the Black Sword Guild informed Shiro that the Western Count had just arrived in town. Shiro suspected that the Earthlings were behind this sabotage, and given the scale of the attack, the leader was likely a significant figure. It seemed the destruction of the Round Table's reputation was also aimed at interfering with their treaty with the Free Cities Alliance. They couldn't just stop the festival, but had to find ways to minimize the damage. Shiro had a plan for retaliation, which did not involve violence as Akatsuki might think. He then called Naotsugu to ask for constant vigilance because they needed to handle the situation quietly and discreetly. Taoya had to go help Karashin. Minori continued her usual tasks, ready to follow any directives from Shiro. She felt that Shiro trusted her greatly. Beyond the overwhelming issues outside, there was too much to handle. Minori knew that getting overly frustrated would only worsen their situation. Seeing her calmly handle everything, Karashin felt as if there was another Shiro present. Shiro, however, still couldn't grasp the enemy's purpose as it was quite chaotic. The red-haired warrior also had to engage in battle to alleviate some of the pressure. Nyanta's area was in chaos as the Earthlings argued extensively, and the issues could not be resolved individually. Simultaneously, various couples were also quarreling due to these disturbances. Shiro and Nyanta could not discern any pattern in these attacks, from traffic jams to heated disputes, bribery, falsifying documents, and other issues. Chaos reigned. When Henry and Akatsuki reported 2 more nonsensical incidents, Shiro realized that there was no grand plan behind them. It was simply chaos wherever they could cause it, and they were suffering because of this pointless purpose. Shiro felt powerless against this type of disorder. However, if nothing was done within the next hour, the situation would escalate. As Shiro pondered his next move, Sojiro arrived, thanking him for recommending the bakery, which he and his group had patronized to the point of selling it out. Seeing Sojiro's carefree attitude, Shiro devised a plan to counter the chaos. At that moment, the Count had arrived at the princess's banquet. The Count started to overstep his bounds, disparaging the adventurers as common folk. When someone approached him, he reacted dismissively. He then inappropriately touched the princess's hair and began disrespecting the food prepared for him. Meanwhile, Shiro found a way to limit the damage. He temporarily borrowed Sojiro's team for security. Since the women in Sojiro's team shared a strong sisterly bond, they could cooperate effectively and handle situations flexibly without escalating issues. This approach proved quite effective, as the Earthlings surrounded by these women caused less trouble. At the same time, it helped resolve conflicts among the quarreling couples. Later, Shiro received news about the situation at the princess's location and quickly set off to help, leaving Nyanta to handle things at the camp. He asked Akatsuki to take care of a stage he planned to use for a spectacular fireworks display. Shiro then arrived to rescue the princess, who was in difficulty due to the Count. The Count was complaining about the lack of storage for the goods he had brought, despite having sent a letter to the princess requesting preparation. Michitaka and Krusty arrived soon after. All 3 stated that the oversight was on the princess's part and they would take responsibility. Since the Count's letter had been sent to them but had not yet reached the princess, the Count was startled, as if he had never sent it. However, he composed himself to continue the engagement. Regarding the goods, Michitaka had a warehouse ready to store everything, so he instructed the Count to proceed with the shipment. Krusty subtly hinted that they were aware of the Count's sabotage attempts, which made him uneasy, and he left abruptly. Shiro then needed the princess to assist with a few tasks. Specifically, Marie's group had organized a fashion show where everyone had a chance to take the stage. The princess and Krusty were the highlights. They had the princess sit in a designated seat and allowed anyone to come and talk to her, giving fans of the princess the opportunity to interact with their idol. However, some still viewed Shiro as a villain who was bullying the princess. Minori came looking for Shiro and saw that everything was settled. However, Shiro was not certain that the Count was the mastermind behind the disruption. Minori asked if Shiro was intentionally making the princess dislike him. He admitted that it was deliberate, as he needed someone close to the princess, and also needed someone to play the role of the villain. He explained that it was necessary for his future plans, but he reassured Minori that he could handle any negative perception towards the guild. What really concerned Minori was how Shiro felt about being disliked. Shiro had never considered that before, but expressed gratitude for Minori's hard work. He admitted that he used to prefer acting alone and gaining strength independently, but now he realized he needed the people around him and the entire world to showcase his talents. He also saw Minori as a role model to emulate, someone extroverted and friendly with everyone. Akatsuki overheard their conversation and walked away. She had never fully understood the implications of Shiro's actions. Although always by Shiro's side, she had failed to grasp the nuances that Minori had pointed out. That evening, Shiro went to meet someone to gather information about the western region. However, the person he met was the same one who had been telling stories about him to the children at the ice castle, known to him as Dariella. She soon revealed her true form, and according to Shiro, she was the guild master controlling all the power in the west. When the catastrophe occurred, she had moved to the west, sponsored by the nobility there, and then used her power to purchase the temple. Capable of manipulating the lives of adventurers, she forced them all to join her guild. She also knew about Shiro and his execution of world-class magic. However, Shiro was aware of her scheme to restart the teleportation gates between towns. Her reason for approaching Shiro was to recruit him. Shiro knew that the recent attack by the Count was orchestrated by her. She did not disclose the truth, but if she did, Shiro would consider her offer. She shared that her life had been quite dull before, but the game gave her a person who inspired her and a desire to conquer. Shiro realized whom she was referring to, but she dismissed the topic before he could remember more. She wanted Shiro under her command, knowing he had discovered a method to aid adventurers and return to the real world. Though it was just an idea, she believed that together, they could truly find a way. She knew Shiro had no specific reason to help the people here, so she wanted to become his reason. However, Shiro thought of his friends and felt he already had his own reasons. He didn't want to ally with her but would become her adversary, thus fulfilling her desire for a challenge. He still couldn't remember who she was, but was convinced he should not follow her. She left, believing that one day he would belong to her. The next day, everyone began cleaning up after the festival. However, Marie's group still had many plans for upcoming holidays. Michitaka couldn't believe that all this festivity stemmed just from the taste of burgers. That night, Shiro's group gathered together cozily. Nyanta encouraged Shiro to give directions more often like a true guild master. Everyone wanted to make an effort to support Shiro, but first, they prioritized leveling up. Shiro had set a goal for them to strive towards. It wasn't about strengthening the continent or returning to their world. The real objective was to change this new world, which had altered their reality. And that's where the movie ends.